The Man from Toronno is an explosion-packed big-budget action film with one-shot combat sequences and unique fight choreography served on a platter of comedy starring Kevin Hart and Woody Harrelson. Watching these characters intertwine is as funny as the story that inspired the premise, and the film's actors are as macho as the characters they play. Within its 2-hour runtime, we see an array of hitmen with swords, axes, and even chainsaws. In a world so full of life, we are left begging to see more of it. And we might just get to, because there are already rumors of The Man from Toronno making a crossover with another buddy action movie franchise. But before we get into that, I'm going to give you behind the scenes and hidden details because this is 12 things you missed in The Man from Toronno. The Man from Toronno is an avid chef, but if you didn't know what it looks like, you might not have made this connection. The large fruit he cuts up in pan fries is a durian fruit, and the dish he is preparing for breakfast is fried durian. Don't get your hopes up because this isn't a dish from Toronto, it's Thai food. Oddly enough, however, the fruit is known for its pungent smell, some even compare to sewage. Perhaps the choice of food is part of the Man from Toronto's macho persona, but more likely it was all set up for the moment where Teddy Jackson is served durian sorbet at the Man from Toronto's new restaurant.
I want to be polite, so I don't like it, but I'm gonna finish.
While I'm sure it's very tasty, and not only because it's cooked by Woody Harrelson, it's probably an acquired taste, and one Kevin Hart was definitely not ready for. Maybe it's more like cilantro, because those who do enjoy the unique flavor of the durian say it is indescribably delicious. Woody Harrelson may have replaced Jason Statham for the role of the Man from Toronto, but he was honestly the only man for the job. Woody Harrelson's father, Charles Harrelson, was a real-life hitman known for assassinating a federal judge. Born in Lovelady, Texas, Charles Harrelson became an active hitman in the early 1960s. By 1979, he had been convicted for 2 assassinations and committed many more. Federal Judge John H. Wood Jr. was the biggest known assassination, but there are both claims and rumors of Charles Harrelson's involvement in the Kennedy assassination. Jim Mars goes into detail about the hypothesized 3 shooters and how Charles Harrelson is one of them. So I'd say that makes him a pretty successful hitman, and even if not, an unsuccessful hitman for a dad is better than no hitman for a dad when trying to get into the role of someone who has as large of a reputation for violence as the Man from Toronto. So sorry Jason, Woody just has the credentials. As
tall, dark, and scary
as the Man from Toronto is, he has a soft side for self-expression. Anne notices his tattoo that expresses a love for cooking, but it probably took a few dates till she got to see the back piece commemorating his grandfather through the bear. He's sentimental for his car as well, that's why he gives it a name. If you're wondering why he named the car after his handler, he could be expressing that he cares about her, but it's more likely just to be a matter of information security. Although his reservations about self-expression cause him to do things like wait to flip the custom plates once he gets home. This might be a matter of protection and identity secrecy more than self-consciousness, but the desire for self-expression is there. My favorite is the spatula keychain on the Man from Toronto's car keys, because it ties the love for cooking to his love for that
1969 Dodge Charger 440 RT.
With a title like The Man from Toronto, it's hard not to look for cultural references. Unfortunately, Canadian audiences were left thirsty because there wasn't so much as a scrap in the way of Torontonian culture. With no accent and hardly a scene in the movie taking place in Canada, it's safe to say that the Man from Toronto's origin story is either made up, or he skipped the part where he moved to Texas at a young age. Either way, it's still interesting that a large portion of the movie was shot in Toronto, probably for funding reasons, but the somewhat memeable result is a would-be local not recognizing the city. Toronto residents will probably recognize the Puerto Rican market as Sunnyside Pavilion, and the overpass the Man from Toronto drives under as the Gardiner Expressway. It's honestly more interesting just to think he made up the backstory to build fear while he readies the hostage for information retrieval. The backstory is probably as real as the threat of violence. Woody Harrelson has the credentials for the Man from Toronto, but believe it or not, he also has the skill. According to the project's supervising stunt coordinator Philip Silvera, Woody Harrelson does 90 to 95% of his scenes, and that includes the fighting ones. Pretty much the only time Harrelson gets swapped out for a professional stunt person is when the character is taking damage, which for the Man from Toronto, that's not often. Woody is able to do this because he's a real-life student of Tai Chi and martial arts. So not only is it actually him in combat, he is physically capable of dealing out that level of punishment. A lot of actors prepare for a role by getting into a character's routine, but martial arts was Harrelson's routine before he got the role, because Woody is just that cool of a guy. Maybe director Patrick Hughes picked Harrelson for the role because he's the real-life man from Midland. Believe it or not, the premise of the movie comes from a real-life low-toner situation. Producer Jason Blumenthal apparently experienced an Airbnb mix-up, where his relatives picked the wrong of two homes in a conjoined house. The family members waited around until the owners came home to find their unexpected guests. After explaining the situation and staying for dinner, they reunited with their legitimate family next door. Well, maybe not a low-toner situation, but it was an Airbnb mix-up. According to legend, the producer then called up Robbie Fox to write the story with Teddy Jackson and the man from Toronto. I suppose a low-toner situation is funnier than a conjoined house, and it is pretty ironic that Teddy sees it as a low-toner situation, because he can't see himself Teddy a situation. Although when he teddies the Airbnb reservation, the results are more positive than they typically are when one teddies a situation because he makes it out with a really cool new friend. After taking a gunshot to the butt, Teddy Jackson gets DIY field medic assistance from the man from Toronto. What's easily one of their best bonding moments gets interrupted by an airport patron. Obviously to help sell this place as a location in the airport, but the bathroom that this intimate scene takes place in has a specific aesthetic you'd recognize if you've ever been to this Canadian movie theater franchise. This must have been one of the Toronto locations, because the 90s geometric style makes this bathroom easily spotted as a Cineplex movie theater bathroom. I'm imagining the two of them stopped by to see if Man from Toronto had a big crowd in theaters, but let's be honest, the old bowling alley aesthetic is somewhat akin to the airport and mall architecture, so the location team probably decided that the iconic 90s look of the Cineplex bathroom would be best for visual continuity. I wonder what materials the man from Toronto even had access to for those stitches. After making their way through the gym and a full round of bad guys, the two buddy action heroes run through a massive display of explosions. This scene used a combination of practical and digital effects with real fires and destruction. According to Patrick Hughes, a whopping 10 cars were destroyed with explosives for this scene alone. Modern big budget films use digital effects as sweeteners to give practical effects that extra pop. But with 10 cars either burning, flipping, getting crushed, or just completely blowing up, there wasn't much of a need for digital sweeteners in this scene. With a budget of $75 million, it's great to see them putting a lot of money into practical effects, because there's nothing better than seeing real explosions on the big screen. Or at least the biggest screen in your house. Hopefully it's not your phone, but I'm sure Patrick's direction still comes to life on a 6-inch screen as it would in a movie theater.
That's the life.
I'm still not convinced that the man from Toronto is actually from Toronto. It seems more likely that he just made up the backstory. I mean, he doesn't even pronounce Toronto right. Every big city has its own way of pronouncing it that only locals really pick up on. For Toronto, you'll be spotted as a tourist if you pronounce the second T. Oddly enough, there are other characters in the film that do pronounce it this way, but every time Woody Harrelson does it, he says
Toronto.
More like a man from Texas rather than a man from Toronto. While this is likely due to actors being local, they could have given Woodrow a little accent training to make his Canadian origin story a little more believable. Unless perhaps we were supposed to gather that the backstory was definitely made up. I mean, I don't think the man from Toronto ever would have revealed to Deborah that
It's just a look.
because he really does keep his distance with her personally. The nail in the coffin on this whole implied fake backstory is that the man from Toronto grew up 50 miles from nowhere. This line is repeated several times throughout the film and is central to his backstory. So why isn't it 50 kilometers from nowhere? There's almost no thought put into the frozen lake because the man from Toronto crafted it to strike fear into people. If it was a real backstory, wouldn't the man from Toronto remember how to get to his childhood home as he would have heard it growing up, measured in kilometers? I don't know, maybe he grew up 80.47 kilometers from nowhere and just converted it from the metric system to not confuse his victims. No, he probably just made up the Canadian origin to make himself more enigmatic to his enemies. The vagueness of his backstory makes him harder to read, which would only intensify the mystery and fear surrounding the man from Toronto. That's why it's really
Just a look.
In this buddy action movie, we see Kevin Hart and Woody Harrelson fight hand-to-hand against hitmen wielding axes, crossbows, and even barbells. The movie's rating is PG, but the action gets pretty brutal between this plate to the face and this axe to the foot. But there's nothing more special than this off-screen haircut that happens near the end of the climactic gym scene. One of the hitmen hired by Deborah comes in with a chainsaw to fight the man from Toronto. This is surely one of the weapon choices that came from Patrick Hughes wanting to mix things up for the climax, because he thinks straight gunfight action movies are too repetitive. From the sounds of it, I think the hitman would have had a better send-off had he just brought a gun, because this is no way to go. Of course, we can only infer what happens off-screen, because according to second unit director Philip Silvera, it's an off-screen haircut. The Man from Toronto is not Patrick Hughes' first big-budget buddy action film, although the $30 million budget movie The Hitman's Bodyguard is not a comedy. It did really well with the box office too, returning $20 million on its opening weekend. Since The Man from Toronto premiered on Netflix, we don't have a box office report, but with almost 3 times the production budget and a direct-to-streaming premiere, there is already talk about a crossover between The Hitman's Bodyguard and The Man from Toronto. Director Patrick Hughes has already pointed out similarities between Kevin Hart's character Teddy Jackson and Ryan Reynolds' character Michael Bryce, and I'm sure there would be great play between Woody Harrelson and Samuel L. Jackson. In The Man from Toronto's Wife's Bodyguard, Hughes has already stated that a crossover, if ever, would be more action-centric than The Man from Toronto, sticking closer to the tone of The Hitman's Bodyguard. Who knows? What started out as an on-set rumor could come true. That's all the info, gossip, and things you missed in The Man from Toronto, or at least till that sequel comes out. In the meantime, you can start working on acquiring that taste for durian fruit as you rewatch The Man from Toronto to count every time someone says
Toronto.